Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing, a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. To gain that understanding, I am mining the intersection of psychology, theology, and philosophy to make you a better writer. This is episode 106, Syntopical Reading into a Zettelkasten, the anchor book. What we started out with was the idea of using a Zettelkasten to let us do syntopical reading as described by Mortimer Adler in his book, How to Read a Book. It's the highest level of reading that he talks about, the fourth level, where you're reading several books simultaneously. Well, there's something really, really wonderful about a Zettelkasten, and that is that it lets you get the benefit of reading the books simultaneously when in fact you're reading them sequentially. So you don't have to have all your sources gathered at once, and yet you have the power of those interacting ideas that are just explosive and very, very, they can stretch your brain to its limits and really help you develop insights. It's totally worth the effort that it takes to do it. And we're going to combine some methodology of 3 different sources to make this really work well. To begin with, we're going to have to choose a foundational book. Now, there's 3 different methods. When Mortimer Adler suggests that you do this, he suggests that you identify the full bibliography of your topic. Even if it's 100 books, you inspectionally read every book on your bibliography, and from that you choose the ones that you're going to read syntopically. That's a pretty big challenge. If you're up for it, go for it. Sertalanges, in his book, The Intellectual Life, he recommends that you identify a foundational book, that you read it very, 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 very carefully, and then you add 2, maybe 3 additional sources that are also worth careful reading. And then after that you just read to fill in the gaps, so to speak, which is sort of like a tangential reading to close the gaps. Now, he doesn't give specific advice as to how to identify books in any given field. He does recommend some books, but only tied to a very tight field. Umberto Eco, however, in his book, How to Write a Thesis, gives some excellent advice on how to identify a foundational book in your area and go with that. Well, we are going to do something that's a little bit synthetic. My area in the podcast, before I got way off onto the Zettelkasten, and thank you because of your interest, I'm staying with the Zettelkasten focus here a bit. But I hope you'll pardon me because I have the perfect example then to use, taking my book, Writing with Emotion, because this will tie it back into the character traits, which is an area that is my basic interest. I use the Zettelkasten largely to track that. But also, if we were going to try to identify the foundational books, the best foundational books on the character traits, we would probably choose the Summa of Thomas Aquinas. And even if you limit it to the volumes on the character traits, you're talking about 4 volumes. It's pretty big. This guy has the advantage that it's 70 pages. And so it's a much more manageable project. And it has a few other attributes that we'll see tonight when we talk about the foundation book. Now, when you're reading the foundational book, you're going to use Mortimer Adler's inspectional reading, especially the first phase of inspectional reading when you're reading for the structure of the book. And what we will do is we will actually be building cards for our Zettelkasten that mirror the structure of that book. And anytime you're doing that kind of a thing where you're laying down a base with your foundational book, Your foundational book is the one that's going to drive your starting structure for your Zettelkasten. So it's very, very important which book you choose. So this one's a bit artificial, but it has some serious advantages. So what structure are we going to be looking for in the book? Well, there's some interesting information early on. Some nice data information to get you going. A lot of things to get the juices flowing, get you excited about reading the book. But right here is where the structure becomes available. And that's exactly what Mortimer Adler suggests you do. Look at the table of contents. And when you look at the table of contents there, you can see that there are 4 major areas. So where are we going to put these? We've talked about 2 basic numbering systems. We've talked about the effortless numbering system, where you just start with a number, and it's number, letter, dash. Number, letter, dash. And the dashes are only there to break it up for readability. Or are we going to start with trying to identify 4 categories, 4 numbers, and lay them out as categories? Because of the organization here, the 4 number categories would be a very valid choice, and it would be very amenable to what we're doing here. However, I don't know what numbers you've got available in your Zettelkasten, and I don't know how your numbering system works. If you've been through my course on my 35-week course on the Reawaken the Dream of Writing, you have all of your character traits in the 5200s. I don't know if that area is available for anyone else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the effortless numbering system. And what that will allow you to do is if you've got your own favorite 4-digit number, you can just take everything in this example and put that number in front of it, dot the effortless number, and you've got a perfect Shepherd, Lumen Shepherd type of a number. So it works really, really well together. So we're going to stick with the effortless. And for me, using that effortless numbering system, my first spot of availability is the number 4. So I'm going to begin with number 4, writing with emotion. 4, writing with emotion. And I'm just going to go number, letter from there. So if I go by the table of contents in this book, there are 4 major topics. Each of those 4 major topics needs to go right next to card 4. And that's not a problem. We're quite familiar with how to handle that. We use a directory card and we say 4 has 4 topics that are vying to go right next to it. And they're just the 4 titles right off the table of contents of my book. Well, we are going to begin with this topic D. And we're going to start there because it's the organization of that section of the book is so easy to pick up on that it just makes a great model for showing you how the number, letter is going to break out. We could quite validly, and we could even come back and pick up these other sections as well. So we're going to begin with D, the 4th one. And so here we have our first card for D, and that's simply the taxonomy of the character traits. My table of contents sends me to the proper section in that book, and it's a chart of the taxonomy of the character traits. And if we look right here at the taxonomy of the character traits, you very quickly see that there are 4 major groups of character traits: resilience, balance, insight, and empathy. All of which belong right next to 4D. Well, by now you know what that means. That means we're going to have a directory card: resilience, balance, insight, empathy. And just for ease, let's start with 4D1, resilience. In 4D1, I lost my place, darn it. I had a Post-it note on it. I should have left it there. In 4D1, on resilience, if you can read it, there are two subgroups: the courage subgroup and the power subgroup. So that is our next breaking point. Resilience has two subgroups: courage and power. So our 4D1 is going to have a directory card: 4D1A, courage; 4D1B, power. We're just going back and forth, number, letter, number, letter. See how effortless it is? It is really totally effortless. So now we'll take the first one on that list. That's the A. So we'll be working with 4D1A, courage. And here's our card for 4D1A, courage. And we just picked up a little of the information, here on the section of courage. And one of the things that we're going to pick up with right away is that, wait a minute, there are 3 character traits under courage: constancy, perseverance, and patience. No surprise then, we have a directory card with exactly those 3 available on it: constancy, perseverance, and patience. So we're going to take the first one, constancy. And just so we see what the page number looks like, this is the first one that has the dash, because we do, after every 4 groupings, number, letter, dash 1 for readability, for constancy. And where we find constancy, now we have to turn to the page on constancy. Now there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of information on this page. It's jam-packed. But if you could see, it's divided into struggle, loss, and victory. So, guess what? Struggle, loss, and victory. You can't help but get how the effortless numbering works. 1A, 4D1A-1A. And so I took some notes on the struggle. Now, the interesting thing in this book, if you've already gotten my book, then you know that after each section, there's a scenario that goes with it. So there's a scenario that goes with victory, with struggle, loss, and victory. And so, besides my 1A on the struggle, I have another card, 1A, 1, which gives me the scenario. So I have one card that tells me the information and another card that's the scenario. I don't have any competition here. There's only one card that wants to go with this guy. What will happen later? We'll see. Because if suddenly later on we get something that goes along with it, we can add a directory card later. So what I want you to know then about the foundational reading book. When you read the foundational book, it's very straightforward. We would do each of the character traits, and we would do sections. We would do each of the sections of the book. We wouldn't skip any if we were doing a true foundational reading. All of these factors would come into play, and we would have examined the whole book and read it analytically onto Zettelkasten cards. Now, that is very, very straightforward. And the interesting thing is that it is not much different at this stage than simply taking notes in a notebook. It's like, okay, you got them on file cards. What's the difference? If the cards come one after the other, the pages come one after the other, what did you gain? And the answer is, at this point, not much, frankly. Although you will have built indexes off of these, and hopefully you will also add a little bit of yourself, but it's kind of hard to add too much of yourself when you're just reading straight through one book. The interesting thing that's going to come about is when we add the second and subsequent books that we're reading, because then we're not going to repeat this process. There's no way that we're going to go through that table of contents and build cards. Then it would be just like notebooks. The foundational book is foundational because it sets the pattern for the cards. Anything else you read now, when we read in depth in the next book, they will go into these cards and interact with these cards. That's what makes it syntopical reading. And so tomorrow we'll play with our first glimpses of how that interplay happens and why it's so powerful. So we'll pick up this topic tomorrow. Bye-bye.